Here, to my 2 daughters, Dad announced, lifting his glass above the Christmas table. 16 relatives turned toward him. One became an attorney. He rested a proud hand on my older sister's shoulder as applause broke out around the room. And the other, his eyes landed on me, became the janitor. Laughter erupted before I could move. At least somebody keeps the offices clean, Uncle Raymond joked. A cousin leaned across the table. Do you get free mops for Christmas, Joyce? I stared at the turkey cooling on my plate, while Dad laughed harder than anyone. Then Mom stood with her glass raised. To our successful daughter, she said, smiling at my sister, and to Joyce for reminding everyone why education matters. That second wave of laughter was quieter, but it cut deeper. I looked toward my sister, expecting surprise or at least embarrassment. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That was when I understood. She had known this was coming. I placed my fork beside my plate. The small click against the china slowly silenced the room. Dad watched me with the same amused expression he always wore when he expected me to swallow another insult for the sake of family peace. For years, I had done exactly that. I had smiled when he called my work cleaning up after important people. I had stayed quiet when Mom told relatives my sister had inherited all the ambition in the family. I had even continued sending them invitations to my office ceremonies, though they never attended a single one. But tonight, they had turned my life into entertainment for 16 people. I pushed my chair back and stood. Mom's smile tightened. Joyce, don't make this uncomfortable. I'm not the one who made it uncomfortable. Dad waved dismissively. Sit down, it was a joke. A joke. I looked around the table. Some relatives avoided my eyes. Others still wore half smiles, waiting for me to laugh along. I've spent years cleaning up after people, I said calmly. Dad chuckled again. See, she admits it. So cleaning up one more mess tonight shouldn't be difficult. His laughter stopped. I reached into my handbag as my sister finally looked at me, her face suddenly pale. Dad leaned forward. What are you doing? I closed my hand around my phone and looked directly at him. Correcting the story you've been telling about me for 10 years. Dad's smile faded just enough for me to notice. What story? He asked. The one you've been repeating every Christmas. I placed my phone on the table, but didn't unlock it. I'm curious, Dad. Why do you keep introducing me as a janitor? He shrugged without hesitation. Because that's what you do. His answer came so quickly, it almost sounded rehearsed. Mom jumped in before anyone else could speak. Joyce, this really isn't the time. No, I replied. Actually, this is exactly the time. The dining room had gone so quiet that the soft Christmas music playing from the living room suddenly seemed loud. I looked from one relative to another. How many of you have heard my parents describe me this way before? Nearly every hand hesitated before someone nodded. I have, Uncle Raymond admitted. So have we, one of my cousins added. They've always said you cleaned office buildings, Aunt Carol said carefully. I nodded. I figured. Dad folded his arms. Because it's true. I met his eyes. I did clean office buildings. His expression brightened immediately. There you go. But not now. His smile froze. I worked nights cleaning commercial offices while I was in college. Nobody interrupted. It paid my tuition. It paid my rent. It kept me from taking out student loans. I smiled slightly. And I have never been ashamed of that job. A few relatives exchanged uncertain glances. I learned more pushing a cleaning cart than most people learn sitting behind a desk. I looked toward my younger cousins. I learned discipline. I learned consistency. And I learned that every person in a building deserves respect, whether they own the company or empty the trash. Uncle Raymond slowly lowered his fork. So, you don't still do that? Before I could answer, Dad laughed loudly. She's making it sound like she became some executive. Mom nodded. She's always liked exaggerating. I turned back to them. I've invited both of you to my office. Neither answered. I invited you to my employee recognition ceremony. Silence. I invited you to our annual leadership dinner. Mom looked away. I invited you to the ribbon-cutting ceremony at our headquarters. Dad scoffed. We were busy. You declined every invitation. Because we already knew what you did. No. I shook my head slowly. You declined because accepting would have forced you to stop telling this story. The words landed harder than I expected. Aunt Carol frowned. You've never been to her office. Dad answered before anyone else could. There wasn't any reason. There was every reason, I replied quietly. You just didn't want the truth. For the first time all evening, my sister shifted uneasily in her chair. She kept staring at her wine glass instead of me. I watched her for several seconds. You've known, haven't you? She didn't answer. Emily. She closed her eyes briefly. Joyce. Dad immediately cut across her. Don't. The single word was sharp enough to stop everyone. Emily fell silent instantly. I felt something inside me finally click into place. For years, I had wondered whether she believed our parents' version of my life. Now I knew. She had known the truth all along. She simply hadn't corrected it. I unlocked my phone. The screen lit up with dozens of unread messages. Congratulations. Outstanding work. Proud to have you leading this project. One of my cousins leaned forward. Who's sending all those? I didn't answer. Dad suddenly stepped around the table toward me. His voice dropped. Put the phone away. Instead, I rested my thumb on the screen. No. His jaw tightened. I said put it away. I looked directly at him. I've spent 10 years letting you tell my story. I glanced toward the television mounted above the fireplace. Now it's my turn. I picked up the remote from the coffee table beside me. Dad took one quick step forward. Joyce. I pressed one button. The television screen came to life. Every face in the room turned toward it. Then the first image appeared. Dad's expression changed instantly. The television screen flickered once before a corporate homepage filled the room. At the top was a professionally photographed headshot. Mine. The room fell silent. Across the bottom of the screen appeared a headline. Leadership team announces successful regional operations expansion. Beneath it was my name. Joyce Carter. Facilities Operations Director *. My father let out a short laugh. Anybody can put a title on a website. I didn't argue. Instead, I tapped the screen again. A professionally produced video began playing. The camera swept across a ballroom packed with hundreds of employees seated around round tables. A banner behind the stage read, Annual Executive Leadership Summit. The Master of Ceremonies stepped to the podium. Please welcome the executive who led this year's largest operational integration project. My picture appeared on 2 enormous screens. Our Director of Facilities Operations, Joyce Carter. The audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation filled the room through the television speakers. I walked onto the stage in the video, shook hands with the company's CEO, and accepted an award before beginning a presentation. No one at Christmas dinner said a word. Even the children stopped eating. Uncle Raymond slowly looked from the television to me. That's you. Yes. You were speaking to all those people. Yes. Dad folded his arms tighter. That doesn't prove anything. It proves she wasn't lying, Aunt Carol answered before I could. Mom forced a nervous smile. There are all kinds of companies nowadays. I clicked to the next slide. An organizational chart appeared. My name sat near the top, beneath the chief operating officer. Below it stretched dozens of department managers. Maintenance, engineering, security, custodial services, vendor relations, capital projects, regional operations. Hundreds of names branched beneath those departments. My cousin blinked. Those people report to you. They report through my leadership team. Another cousin frowned. So, he looked genuinely confused. You're not one of the janitors. I smiled. I was. The room turned toward me. I started exactly where Dad says I did. I worked overnight custodial shifts while I was in college. I vacuumed offices. I emptied trash. I scrubbed floors. I cleaned conference rooms after executives went home. I looked around the table. That work helped pay for every class I took. I'll always be proud of it. Then I added quietly, but that was 10 years ago. No one laughed this time. I stayed with the company after graduation. I moved into scheduling, then building operations, then regional logistics, then project management, and eventually executive leadership. I paused. I didn't leave the people who cleaned the buildings. I learned how to lead them. Uncle Raymond slowly shook his head. Harold, he looked toward my father. You made it sound like she'd never moved beyond that job. Dad waved dismissively. So she manages maintenance workers. I nodded. Among many other things. Mom leaned forward. Joyce, sweetheart, nobody cares about job titles. I looked directly at her. Really? She hesitated. Then why was Emily introduced as the attorney instead of simply our daughter? Nobody answered. The silence became uncomfortable. I opened another presentation. This one displayed an aerial photograph of several downtown office towers. Our company completed a regional property acquisition 3 weeks ago. Dad rolled his eyes. What does that have to do with Christmas dinner? I enlarged one photograph. A familiar glass office building filled the television. Emily's expression changed instantly. She knew the building. Everyone noticed. I looked at her. You recognize it. She slowly nodded. It's our office. Several relatives turned toward her. Your law firm, Aunt Carol asked. Emily swallowed. Yes. I faced the room again. My company now owns that building. Dad laughed again, though this time it sounded forced. So what? You own the building. Big deal. I never said I owned it. I kept my voice calm. I said my company owns it. He smirked. So that doesn't make you Emily's boss. No. It doesn't. Relief briefly crossed his face. I don't supervise attorneys. His shoulders relaxed. Then I finished the sentence. I supervise the executive division responsible for whether every one of those attorneys has a functional office to work in. The room became perfectly still. Even Dad stopped moving. An uncle quietly whispered. And what? I continued. My department oversees building operations, security, infrastructure, emergency planning, vendor contracts, renovations, technology coordination, environmental compliance, and every major operational decision affecting those offices. Emily stared down at the table. It's true, she said softly. Dad immediately turned toward her. What are you talking about? She finally looked up. Our firm received the acquisition announcement. She took a slow breath. They introduced Joyce during the executive transition meeting. Nobody spoke. Then Aunt Carol asked the question everyone was suddenly thinking. If all of this is true, she looked directly at me. Why has this family believed something completely different for years? I opened my mouth to answer. But Emily spoke first. Because. She looked at Dad. He told me never to correct anyone. Every head at the table turned toward my father. His face went completely white. No one spoke. The Christmas music continued playing softly in the background, sounding strangely distant now. Dad looked from Emily to me. What did you just say? Emily swallowed. I said, you told me never to correct anyone. Mom immediately stepped in. Emily, enough. But Emily shook her head for the first time all evening. No. The word surprised everyone, including me. She slowly placed her wine glass on the table. When relatives asked what Joyce did, she looked at Dad. You always answered before she could. Dad's voice hardened. I was protecting this family. From what? Uncle Raymond asked. Dad ignored him. Emily continued. When I tried correcting Aunt Carol 3 years ago. She took a slow breath. Dad told me people respected lawyers more than facilities managers. She looked down. He said explaining Joyce's actual job would only confuse people. Every pair of eyes shifted toward Dad. He forced a laugh. Oh, come on. It wasn't that serious. I finally spoke. It was serious enough that you repeated it for 10 years. Nobody laughed. Instead, Aunt Carol leaned back in her chair. Harold. She frowned. Did you really know Joyce wasn't a janitor all this time? Dad hesitated. That hesitation answered the question before he spoke. I knew she worked in operations. You introduced me as a janitor anyway. He looked irritated now. It's basically the same field. No. I answered calmly. It isn't. I tapped my phone again. Another screen appeared. This time, it wasn't a company presentation. It was a calendar. Dozens of meetings filled every weekday. Executive budget review. Regional operations council. Board strategy session. Emergency infrastructure committee. Capital planning conference. Several relatives leaned forward. Uncle Raymond quietly whistled. You attend all of those. I chair some of them. Dad rolled his eyes. So you're busy. I ignored the sarcasm. Instead, I opened another document. An email filled the television. The sender's name immediately caught everyone's attention. Michael Lawson, Chief Executive Officer *. The subject line read, Congratulations on completing the Hamilton legal integration. I opened it. The first paragraph appeared. Joyce. Outstanding work leading the integration of the Hamilton portfolio. Your leadership ensured every legal office remained operational without a single day of downtime. This project would not have succeeded without your direction. I closed the email. Nobody questioned whether it was real. There was no need. The company logo. The executive signature. The language. Everything about it looked authentic. Mom quietly cleared her throat. Well, she searched for words. That's very impressive. I looked at her. You've had copies of these announcements for years. She blinked. What? I mailed them. No response. I emailed them. Still nothing. I invited both of you to ceremonies where I received awards. Dad looked away. You always said you were busy. Uncle Raymond slowly turned toward him. Were you? Dad stayed silent. I answered instead. They weren't. Everyone looked back at me. They simply never came. The room felt smaller. The laughter from earlier now seemed impossible. Then I revealed something none of them expected. 6 months ago, I looked directly at Dad. You called me. His face immediately tightened. You asked to meet privately. Nobody moved. You told me your investment partnership had collapsed. Mom's head snapped toward him. What? Dad whispered. Joyce, you said you were going to lose the house. Mom stared at him. You told me the investment was doing fine. He said nothing. I asked how much you needed. I continued calmly. You told me the amount. I transferred the money through your attorney because you didn't want anyone else in the family to know. Gasps spread around the table. Emily looked stunned. You paid it. I nodded. I never wanted credit. I looked back at Dad. I just didn't want my parents losing their home. Uncle Raymond frowned. Harold, you accepted money from Joyce. Dad rubbed both hands across his face. It was a loan. I nodded. It was. And I never mentioned it. I paused. But you still introduced me as the janitor tonight. Nobody defended him. Not one person. Mom slowly sat back in her chair as tears filled her eyes. I didn't know. I looked at her gently. You knew enough. She lowered her head. For several long seconds, the only sound was the crackling fireplace. Then my television chimed. A new notification peered in the upper corner of the screen. The sender was unmistakable. Michael Lawson, CEO *. The preview message was visible to everyone. Excellent news. The board unanimously approved your promotion this evening. Looking forward to announcing it after the holidays. No one breathed. Dad stared at the television. Then at me. His mouth opened. But no words came out. Chapter 3 complete. Hit Go to continue.